The town's oldest clock stopped at exactly 7:15, and the next morning an old watchmaker handed me a pocket watch engraved with my father's initials. Then he said, "Your father didn't die with his secrets. He left them for you." I wish I had walked away. My father had been gone for 6 months. He was a quiet man who never talked about the past, especially the night my younger brother, Daniel, disappeared from our town for 3 years. Daniel eventually came home, and Dad welcomed him without asking questions. I never understood why. When the clock stopped, everyone blamed the storm from the night before. Walter, the retired watchmaker, didn't.
तू
He
शाम
pulled me
वास्ते वीडियो
aside
बड़ा
and
again.
gave me the brass watch. "Don't open it until 7:15 tonight," he warned. "And don't let Daniel see it." I felt a chill. Why? Walter looked at me with tired eyes. "Because your brother has spent 30 years making sure nobody learns what happened." On my drive home, I kept thinking about that sentence. Daniel was my brother. We had fought, laughed, shared a bedroom, and buried our parents together. Yet for the first time, I wondered whether the person I trusted most had been hiding something terrible. If you like stories about family secrets that refuse to stay buried, subscribe to Family Betrayal. And the photos, faces, locations, and background scenes used in this story are only visual representations to help bring the events to life. At 7:15, my hands were shaking as I opened the watch. A tiny key fell into my palm. Beneath it was one sentence: Locker 18, train station, tomorrow. Then my phone rang. It was Daniel. He asked, "What did Walter give
तू
you?"
शाम वास्ते
I
वीडियो बड़ा
hesitated.
again.
Daniel asked again, this time more sharply, "What did Walter give you?" I lied. "Nothing." "What?" There was silence. Then he said, "Stay away from Walter." The call ended. I barely slept. At sunrise, I drove to the old train station. Locker 18 was still there, covered in dust. The key fit perfectly. Inside was a faded envelope, a photograph of my father standing beside Walter, and a newspaper clipping about a fire at our family's warehouse 30 years earlier. But the photograph had something strange. Daniel was in it too, even though he had always told me he was at school that night. The fire had destroyed valuable company records, and investigators suspected arson. No charges were filed. Under the photograph, my father had written, "I chose silence to protect both my sons." I felt angry. Protect us from what? Then I found a second note. Ask Daniel about the missing ledger. My heart dropped. When I got home, Daniel was waiting in my
तू
driveway.
शाम वास्ते
He
वीडियो
looked
बड़ा
at the
again.
envelope in my hand and went pale. "You weren't supposed to find that," he whispered. Neither of us moved. I asked him about the ledger. He looked down. Dad knew. Knew what? That I took it. I felt as if the ground had shifted beneath me. Daniel admitted that, as a teenager, he had stolen the company ledger after discovering Dad was planning to expose someone for stealing money. He panicked and hid the evidence. The warehouse fire happened afterward. But then he told me something that made my anger disappear. "Dad wasn't protecting me from the police," he said. "He was protecting you from the truth." I asked, "What truth?" Daniel reached into his jacket and handed me another envelope. "Read Dad's letter." My father's letter began with an apology. He explained that Daniel had not caused the warehouse fire. Dad's business partner, Robert Hale, had been stealing from the company for years. The ledger contained proof. Daniel had found the ledger and hidden it because he was terrified Robert would hurt our family. Dad knew
तू शाम
Daniel
वास्ते
had made
वीडियो
a
बड़ा
terrible
again.
mistake, but instead of blaming him, Dad spent years searching for the evidence. Then came the part that broke me. Dad wrote that he had never told me because I had been the one person Robert trusted. Dad believed Robert was watching me and feared I would become his next target if I knew too much. I cried at the kitchen table, realizing how often I had blamed Dad for taking Daniel's side. I had carried that resentment for years. Then came the worst part. "Daniel," Dad wrote, "if you are reading this with your brother, it means Walter finally opened the door. The original ledger is not in the station locker. It is inside the town clock." I stared at Daniel. He shook his head. "That's why the clock stopped. We went to Walter's shop. He finally told us the truth. My father had hidden the ledger inside the clock mechanism decades earlier and asked Walter to reveal it only when both sons were ready. But before we could reach the clock tower, Robert Hale appeared. I recognized him from the photograph. He
तू
looked at
शाम वास्ते
Daniel
वीडियो
and
बड़ा
said,
again.
"You should have left the past alone." Daniel stepped in front of me. For the first time, I saw fear in Daniel's eyes. Then Robert smiled and said, "Your father never told you the worst part." I looked at him. "What worst part?" Robert finally admitted the truth. He had started the warehouse fire himself after realizing Dad had discovered the theft. He expected the ledger to burn with everything else, but Daniel had taken it first. Dad spent the rest of his life gathering proof quietly. The final piece was inside the clock. Walter opened the mechanism, revealing a metal case with the ledger and a recording Dad had made years earlier. Hearing his voice again broke me. He said he wasn't asking us to punish anyone. He wanted us to stop carrying his fear after he was gone. He wanted his sons to know that one terrible mistake didn't have to define a lifetime. We turned the evidence over to the authorities. Robert was finally held accountable. Daniel accepted responsibility for hiding the ledger when he was young. For months, I wondered why Dad waited until after his death. Then I understood. He was waiting for a truth that could bring us together instead of tearing us apart. Daniel and I repaired the family business. We stopped avoiding difficult conversations and finally talked about Dad, the fire, and the years we had lost. Sometimes I still visit the clock tower. At 7:15, the clock moves normally now. I used to think the clock stopped because something was broken. Now I believe it stopped because it was finally time for the truth. If you were in my place, would you have forgiven Daniel? Or would the years of silence have been too much? Tell me your choice in the comments. Share this story with someone who believes family can survive painful truths. My father's greatest inheritance wasn't money. It was the truth. Sometimes the secret that hurts most is the one that teaches us to forgive. Subscribe to Family Betrayal for more stories where the truth always finds its way home.